One of the great questions of the manosphere, or perhaps more specifically of the MGTOWosphere, is whether or not the juice is ever worth the squeeze. Now, if you've been in the manosphere or the MGTOWosphere for quite some time, you know exactly what that means. I am, of course, referring to the idea of whether or not being involved in a so-called relationship with a woman can ever be worth it. Now, of course, I could just end the video by saying it really comes down to the individual man, and it's for each man to decide. And of course, that's true, but that wouldn't make for much of a video. And beyond that, I think that there are some general criteria that we might mention, and specifically one major point that I think is extremely important, perhaps the most important when it comes to this question. And so that should be borne in mind. But generally speaking, my experience with relationships with women tell me that, as a rule, based on my own experiences, relationships with women are sources of life disruption and stress, which is to say, almost everyone I had at the end of the day provided more stress to me than it did reduce the stress. And so, for me, that is essentially the golden metric if I were to ever consider entertaining the idea of a relationship again. Now, I'm pushing 50, so that's very, very unlikely, but just theoretically. And I think it's also something that should be borne in mind for the younger men and the much younger men, because how much a relationship will detract from the rest of your life is, to my mind, perhaps the most important question that you can pose here. One of the biggest questions that emerges when posing this greater question is, what is the reason you are looking to be in a relationship? Why are you seeking a relationship out? And I think if your ultimate goal is the biological drive of reproduction, then this question might not even be relevant to you, because you're going to have to deal with women, right? You cannot create life, unfortunately. You cannot reproduce without pairing with a woman. Therefore, it's kind of a moot point. But let's say that's not the only reason you want to be in a relationship. Let's say you are considering companionship, you want box, you want all these things. Well, how disruptive is this relationship going to be to your life and the things you enjoy doing, right? I think that some amount of stress is important in life, in the sense that you don't want a completely frictionless life, because it's within that friction that you have periods of growth and you can learn new things, you have challenges. But I would propose that the kind of friction that you encounter in a relationship doesn't really lead to the types of growth that people usually talk about when they're talking about challenges and stress. So you might know this concept from biology, this term hormesis, which typically involves talking about toxins or substances that are somewhat harmful to the body, but can also be broadly applied to the idea of stress, and how after a period of acclimation adaptation, your body will be all the stronger for it. Well, in my observation, again, it's just my own experience, the kinds of stress and the kinds of disruption that I've gotten to know in vis-a-vis relationships have never made any contribution to me improving as an individual, in the sense of me becoming healthier, gaining more knowledge, making more money. If anything, every relationship I ever had drained me of money, and in addition to that, was extremely disruptive for my general well-being and really all the activities I enjoy doing. So there's not necessarily a uniformity there of the kinds of things men like to do, because, well, we're all individuals. However, I would say that that is, to my mind, the core question that we should all be asking ourselves. It's just my opinion, of course. How disruptive will a relationship be to your normal routine, to the things you enjoy, and to the quality of your life? Now, obviously, I'm speaking from a manospherian perspective. Obviously, to a normie type person, these questions would be either odd to possibly insane, to perceive and interpret relationships primarily as sources of stress and disruption. Now, I don't want to say that the relationships I had were only that, but a large part of it was, in fact, a matter of stress, and the benefits that were provided in the relationship never outweighed the downsides. So that's important to bear in mind. There might be some men out there, and I'm using might a bit euphemistically, that think box, for example, is such an important thing in life and so important to them as individuals that they will go through the rigmarole of dealing with a lot of BS in order to get access to it. And that's for each man to decide. But honestly, it is extremely rare these days that you'll encounter a female that will reduce the stress you feel in life and improve the quality of your life. It is rare, perhaps not as hen's teeth, but very, very rare. Those would be my parameters. And I'm not saying that should be every man's parameters, but I think generally speaking, it's a good rule of thumb. Will said relationship reduce your stress, make your life easier, better, or will it make it worse? Very simple. Now you could say, well, hold on. Everyone thinks along those lines. No, they really don't. Most people, most normies out there do not think of relationships in terms of, will it improve my life? Will it make it worse? They simply follow their animalistic urges and instincts and think, relationship, I need, right? Because that's just what people want. They want to be in a relationship because being in a relationship is de facto good. Ignoring all sorts of things, be they red flags, be they other issues that might emerge during the course of a relationship, they will simply think to themselves, being in a relationship is a good thing. One relationship ends, they're single, but they want to be in a new one. Not even necessarily because the relationship was good, but because status quo de facto relationships are quote unquote good. So I do think this is a somewhat different perspective because I've heard the alternative that nobody really wants to be in a stressful, disruptive relationship. That's technically true. But people who don't think along these lines within this paradigm typically also don't think along the lines of stress minimalization and minimal disruption to improvement of life. And it's not easy. It really isn't. I had a friend once who came from a Western European country, and he got along with a woman who was not from Western Europe, from another part of the world, and they actually had a pretty decent rapport, got along pretty well. There weren't a tremendous amount of red flags, but he was fairly red-pilled, you could say, or black-pilled, depending on your perspective. And really the issue ultimately came down to she needed a certain kind of visa, which is to say she needed a marriage ticket. Now, it could have all just been smoke and mirrors. He wasn't sure, although he had his doubts, thought that she was legitimate, but you never really know. And so that's a perfect example of, is the juice worth the squeeze? Well, he found a girl that he got along with, liked her a lot, blah, 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 blah. Seemed, at least on the face of it, quite different, but due to certain circumstances, such as not being allowed to legally live and work in his country, it simply was not an option, and he was not willing to go down the marriage route just to test out the theory. And maybe he lost out, maybe he didn't. It's impossible to say, but these are also circumstances that can emerge that have, assuming the other tests have been passed, for example, in his case, that this woman had more or less passed the stress test. Was she going to make his life worse or better? Well, all of that became a moot point because she didn't have the right passport and he wasn't willing to go through with a marriage, which is totally understandable. And there you have it. Another thing to be factored in the beginning is how much can you tell about an individual in the beginning? Can you tell, for example, if she's going to be a major stress factor or not? Really hard to do. There's some obvious red flags, obviously, but the red flags aren't always there. So, I don't know. I'm very stress averse after the relationships I've had because they were invariably more stress than they were benefit. And I'm not saying that has to be the case for everyone, but unless you really, really want to reproduce, in which case it's unavoidable, you're going to have to deal with the stress of a female, then questions of companionship really come down to, well, is the juice worth the squeeze? Maybe, if she's actually making your life better, right? But how often does it actually happen? So I think for the younger guys, this might be a little less relevant because they're so horny and so desirous of box and are still very much taken in by the quote-unquote feminine mystique, if you wish to call it that. That's a play on something, as I'm sure you're aware, that they're going to ignore this sort of thing. But if you're already in your 30s, for example, this is definitely something to consider. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Maybe, provided, again, that the relationship makes your life less stressful, that it is not disruptive, that it improves the quality of your life. And again, most people, males and females, do not think in these categories. They typically think in terms of instinct. Oh, I just want to be in a relationship, irrespective of what the relationship does to their lives. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please hit the like button, comment, subscribe, share the video if you've not yet done so. And if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.